Good morning and welcome to Ganashot. As you can see, I have with me my good old friend, Dr. John Helmer, and it's a pleasure to talk to him always. And all of you who are watching this podcast, I also know that you have developed a taste for John Helmer's way of thinking, which I didn't think would happen in India so fast. I must tell this to you, John, that a lot of people ask me why you're not interacting with John at the outset. Right. So, with this, let's jump into the topic. Yeah, I see there. Brig Sahgal has also joined us.
I'm in the car,
Uh,
but I'll join you. Listen.
yeah, first class. Great. That's great. That's excellent. So, I was just telling John that uh, we know what's happened in Venezuela. It's going to have repercussions all over the world. And from my own way of thinking, I think the global equations are going to change. We might debate on the morality of what USA has done or not. That's a different story. But the aftermath of this, and it's going to be felt in USA, it's going to be felt in USA itself, it's going to be felt in China, it's going to be felt in Russia, and it's going to be felt in India too. Because a lot of equations change. And to quote the social media, China has already taken $100 billion hit. There are many angles to this whole story. And, John has also already been on record, and one of his clips is going viral, or one of his statements is going viral, that if Trump enters Venezuela and does what he has to do, and whatever, it will prove China and Russia as paper tigers, and the whole world scenario changes. This is the background I'd like to give. And also, I'd like to say that, look, whatever has happened here gives India a golden opportunity. And we'll talk of it later in the show. But first, let me get John's take on what's happened in Venezuela and where do you see things going from here. And then, of course, we'll get to Brigadier Sahgal, who's joined us in a car. So gracious of him. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Ravi. I'm glad to see Arun. Keep your eye on the road, please. Whatever. Now, we've got to look at the way the road ahead is. And there's no doubt that from a global point of view, what's happened in Venezuela over the last 36 to 48 hours is world shaking. But let me reflect on how it affects Russia, how it affects India. And let me start with a simple equation for our audience and use the equation to come back to the facts on the ground. The equation is simply S plus S equals SS. And that stands for self-sufficiency plus sovereignty equals strategic success. Take one of those away and you have strategic failure. Let me work back to the ground, the facts, the military facts on the ground as they're seen in Moscow, and then Caracas, and then our topic here. How does this affect India, and in particular the India-Russia relationship? Let's be very clear that from Russian point of view, there was a predecessor event, a major one. That is to say, a major drone attack over Thursday, Friday, on the residence of President Putin in Novgorod region in the north of Russia. I've talked about that elsewhere. The facts on the ground are on the Russian side, that approximately 91 drones were fired by the Ukrainians, and over the next several hours, roughly half of them were shot down in several regions of Russia before they reached Novgorod region. Approximately 41 reached Novgorod region and were then intercepted and shot down before they did any damage to the very large presidential complex that dates back to the 1930s, a residency of President Putin, and also a nuclear command control bunker. The Russian side has presented evidence by no less than the head of military intelligence, Admiral Igor Kostikov, to the United States, who sent a low-level captain to receive the evidence that the targeting data in one of the drones retrieved showed that the target was the residential complex. What's not clear, it's been said by some Ukrainian sources, it's been amplified in the Russian side, is that the targeting was of the nuclear bunker complex, not the person of the president. It is almost always the case that a presidential residence has a secure nuclear command control bunker attached to it, so that they always come together. The issue is whether the Ukraine, with the support of US intelligence, NATO intelligence of all types, satellite, fixed wing, drone, and other, NATO intelligence and British intelligence assisting in the targeting and the maneuver of these attacking drones, intended to kill the president or intended to show the capability of the United States and its allies to attack the nuclear command structure of Russia. Either one is a major strategic blow. Okay? Now, that's interpreted immediately by the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, who identified what happened, was the first Russian official to report what had happened after an unusual delay from the defense ministry in identifying what had happened, the facts on the ground. Lavrov explained it as causing a major revision of Russia's negotiating position towards the settlement of the Ukraine war. That's towards Trump as well as towards Zelensky and the European allies. Now, from a Russian point of view, and the facts on the ground aren't yet clear enough to be categorical, there is no coincidence between the demonstration effect of the Novgorod attack and the ability of the United States to attack Caracas and capture President Maduro and his wife, effectively take them out of the country without a loss of American lives and with the effect of having destroyed virtually all the ground, air, and naval defenses of Venezuela. The Russian side, therefore, has to say, was the Novgorod attack a warning that, in the first place, the United States and Trump knew exactly where President Putin was? And second, is the United States and its allies, including the Ukraine, capable of launching a similar and heavier attack against the president of Russia, who, by the way, has been indicted by an international court as a war criminal in not different circumstances and not different reasons from the way in which the US purports to have indicted President Maduro. These two, combination of facts on the ground of military strikes, are not regarded as coincidental in Moscow. They are regarded as sequential. They are regarded by Foreign Minister Lavrov as compelling a revision of the negotiating terms. Now, what that means, we could elaborate in factional political terms in Moscow, but essentially the Russian side is saying, before Caracas events, that the whole approach that President Putin has taken through his business emissary, his money bag, Kirill Dmitriev, who negotiated with Stephen Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and a couple of others. Also, on the US, on Trump's side, money bags for Trump. That whole approach has to be revised. It does not attract significant concessions from the United States. It's not a lure for Trump to reach anything like the kind of security guarantees that Russia has put on the table for months, in fact, for years, to assure mutual security in Europe, to prevent a so-called ceasefire agreement or a short-term agreement for representing only a pause before the war would resume a little later. That's rejected by the Russian side, and what is therefore interpreted on the Novgorod attack combined with the Caracas attack is an indication that Trump is capable of doing anything to attack the head of government, the head of state of a country against whom he's fighting. Now, let me just point out that during the lengthy press conference that Trump, General Kane, Secretary of State Rubio, Secretary of Defense Hegseth gave in Mar-a-Lago at 11 o'clock after the attack, Trump was asked what his current communications have been with Putin. The question was, had he on the telephone last with Putin talked about Maduro? That was the question. Did you talk about this? Trump said, no, we didn't. We never talked about Maduro. That's a significant point about what President Putin left out, if Trump is telling the truth. Next question for Trump. Are you mad at him? Are you angry at Putin right now? I mean, there's disintelligence, and the question was then cut off. That was a reference to the Novgorod raid. Bear in mind, the Russians say it happened. The US side, particularly the CIA, the director of CIA, John Radcliffe, is reported, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and various other places, to have personally briefed Trump to say the Russians are faking the event. Okay, so the question was, are you angry at Putin, Mr. Trump, for the intelligence that goes to the question of whether there was an attack and whose line? Trump's answer, I'm not thrilled with Putin. I'm not thrilled with Putin. He's killing too many people. Not a line, not a novel line for him. But then he goes on, it's a negative line, notwithstanding. He goes on, and this is the end of the press conference, the last question. I inherited that war, the Ukraine-Russia war. That was Joe Biden, Zelensky, and Putin. I came into the situation and it's a mess. I'm looking down to read it. I will say this. I watched an operation last night that was so precise, so brilliant. I mean, it was incredible. If we had our people like this General Kane, and our people involved, that war, that's the war with Russia, would not have gone on very long. That I can tell you. Now, what's that mean in the context, the American context? Well, it means the line that the Americans, that Trump, Hegseth, Kane, and Rubio all repeated during their press conference. Trump, and I'm quoting, an assault like people have not seen since World War II. No nation in the world could achieve what America achieved yesterday. Hegseth, our adversaries, they include Russia, obviously, remain on notice. America can project our will anywhere, anytime. No other country on planet Earth could pull off this operation. General Kane, an operation, frankly, only the US military could undertake. Rubio, again quoting the same line, we'll talk and meet with anybody, but don't play games. Don't play games with this president in office because it's not going to turn out well. And so I hope, this is Rubio, I hope that, I guess that lesson was learned last night, and I hope it will be instructive moving forward. In other words, the US, in announcing what it has just done to Venezuela, and it's phase one, we can get on to what they propose to do as Trump claims they will now run Venezuela. The message is for everybody else in the world, starting with Russia. Putin was the only foreign leader identified in that press conference, with China, with Iran, with North Korea, and so on. So what we have here is a major strategic challenge for Russia, first of all. And second, we have a very significant challenge to the military capabilities of Russia to defend its own president and nuclear command bunker, as well as its own allies. So let me pass on to the statement that has been made by Foreign Minister Lavrov, who just before, a few minutes before the Trump press conference, had a telephone conversation at length with the vice president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez Gomez.
Okay.
And I'll just read you again, looking downwards to get the words right. Sergei Lavrov expressed firm solidarity with the people of Venezuela confronting an armed aggression. Russia will keep supporting, he used the words continuous, keep supporting the policy of the Bolivarian government to protect the country's national interests and sovereignty. The officials spoke against further escalation so as to find a solution by a dialogue. During the conversation, the parties expressed mutual commitment to bolster up comprehensive strategic partnership between Russia and Venezuela. In other words, the Russian side is saying it will continue to support, it will bolster strategic partnership. Its policy will be solidarity confronting the US aggression. Now, how can the foreign minister of Russia say that after it would appear that all the Russian air defense systems on the ground failed to operate effectively? They were all apparently suppressed. There's no other information yet to show that any one of the significant Russian systems or any one of the alternative other supplied systems available to the Venezuelans were actually used and fired either at the incoming American missiles, bombs, bombers, or subsequently the helicopters. Is Lavrov making a firm commitment to keep up something which on the battlefield in Caracas appears just to have failed? Is this barring the barn after the horse has escaped, or in this particular case, President Maduro has been captured? So those are some facts on the ground. To go back to the S plus S equal SS, self-sufficiency plus sovereignty equals strategic success. I would like to make this quick summary because it goes to the question of the strategic partnership between India and Russia facing adversaries in the future. Self-sufficiency means, at the very least, the prevention of an internal fifth column, a major force inside a country betraying the government, betraying the president, turning him over to an outside force, participating in a putsch. That's a concern, obviously, in explaining why Maduro's Cuban bodyguards, why the Venezuelan military failed to respond, and so on. It's a concern for all states under the second element, the external pressure. Russia prefers to describe its relationship with state terrorism as terrorism, not war. The external pressure on Russia was demonstrated late last week as a, quote, state terrorist act to kill the president or kill the nuclear command control bunker nearby. The third element of self-sufficiency that has to be combated, fifth column internally, external pressure through terrorism. The third element is economic warfare. And what we've seen is the military stage of a program of massive economic warfare at Venezuela, at the same time as massive economic warfare is underway against Russia, against China, and to some extent against India, with a war at sea against individual tankers, a war at sea to change the nature of Russian trade, Indian trade, Chinese trade, and so forth. Now, without the ability to develop self-sufficiency on each of those scores, without the capacity economically and militarily and politically to deter and defeat the kind of operation that Trump has just pulled off against Venezuela, self-sufficiency will not be adequate. It won't be sufficient. Sovereignty will fall short. And in my equation, that means strategic retreat, strategic defense. What it doesn't mean is strategic success. So maybe that's enough from me of facts on the ground and strategy in the air. Over to you.
Thanks a lot. You outlined a lot of things and where Russia stands in this whole story, and what are the implications and what are the things for the world at large. Very clearly, there's a gunslinger in town with his gun going loose, and he's got the capability to enforce his will, and he's demonstrated that in Venezuela, and there are going to be a lot of implications. And I'm thankful to Dr. Helmer, who's put out to us one sphere of thought as far as Russia and India are concerned, and to a certain extent, the implications for China. With this, I'd request Brig Arun Sahgal, sir, your view on the macro issues of what's happened in Venezuela and the aftermath. And of course, from an Indian perspective would be a better way of putting it.
Yeah. Okay. So there are 3-4 things that we need to take cognizance of. One is the new Monroe Doctrine, or a true Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine in the Northern Hemisphere. He has executed that doctrine, particularly in the context of creating a scenario in Caracas where he has picked up a national leader who was a ruling leader of a country and brought him to America under handcuffs. And he has started a new revolution, or let's put it this way, a new state of emergency in Caracas. Now, what are the consequences? I would like to impress upon one point is that, like I've always maintained, it is easy to start something, but it is difficult to get success. Like you said, strategic success is not only strength, but it is smart diplomacy and smart employment of power. We already have a scenario where the similar kind of a mission the United States embarked in 2001, and then hung around there for 20 years without success in Afghanistan. The same thing happened in Iraq. The important thing to note is, from our perspective, is that United States goes in to leverage power, utilizes power against nations which are weak, defenseless. It also, in this particular case, chosen a country which is far away from although China and Russia have interests. Russia has security interests in Caracas. There is an oil angle also involved. As far as the Chinese are concerned, they have $100 billion of investment. But the fact of the matter is, the influence of both these countries to do anything of consequence against the American power, which can be leveraged in a short period of time in its own backyard, is limited. So to that extent, I do not consider this to be a very glorified success as it is being tried to be made by the United States media or the United States administration is an act of piracy, an act of war in which Americans have succeeded and they are complementing each other. And I saw this kind of complements again in the Kuwait War, and we saw in the first Iraq War, we saw them in Afghanistan, and seen them a number of times, number of places in the past. Even when the Vietnam War started, if you take your mind off, all the bombing and all was being showcased as something fantastic. Now, what are the consequences? The consequences of this are that China, the message to the Chinese and the Russians is that you do not enter my backyard and try to destabilize my backyard. Similar message was given in Panama Canal and you only mentioned the other day that how the statue has been disfigured and brought down in Panama. So the bottom line is Americans are trying to send a message. The second message which is gone is intervention in national interest, including use of force to achieve your own strategic objectives, is par for the course. So, in my view, this will embolden both the Chinese and the Russians not to seek any settlement with the West, be it Ukraine, be it Taiwan, in the near future. This will also mean that countries like China, Russia, and somewhere down the line India would have to rethink their own strategic thinking and their own strategic relationship with the United States, and not only in terms of strategic only, but in terms of even economic relationships. So I see BRICS becoming an important player in the region. India has just taken over the presidency of BRICS, and we will need to look at this whole issue from a perspective of how do we, the global South and the powers that are outside the Western hemisphere or the Western sphere of influence, consolidate their power and influence. Yet another element is the G20 summit. In G20 summit, an interesting thing has happened. The Americans are trying to create a Euro bloc within the G20, isolating the global South. And this is an issue where India will need to have a degree of understanding and commitment. And for India, the problem not going to be is that somewhere down the line, as a consequence of this, from a strategic perspective, it cannot play the role of balancing West versus the East, or let's put it this way, is strategic autonomy indefinitely. We will now have to look at how do we want to shape our own strategic interests, given the manner in which the Americans are capable of leveraging power, given the manner in which the so-called other two players, the Chinese and the Russians, have been checkmated, and their capacity to project powers are also limited. So this brings me to the question is that while we try and look at this whole issue and shape our diplomatic response, India would require to do one more thing, and that is to rapidly develop strategic capabilities. We had to test like ICB, Agni 6, Agni 10, long range intercontinental ballistic missile systems, and we must have the capability to be able to inform and importantly showcase to the other side that there will be consequences if there is any intervention in our scenario. So bottom line is that from my perspective, Taiwan issue is going to become a Chinese issue, and American intervention will not be accepted. Ukraine is going to ceasefire in Ukraine, or any kind of resolution, you can put it in the back burner. Third issue is India will also have to recalibrate its interests as far as oil are concerned. We have two refineries which we have invested in, where we have got $500 billion worth of our assets are lying there. We have not been able to repatriate. Those are some of the issues that we'll have to say. But luckily, our dependence on heavy crude is limited, so we are okay in that sense. So, in short, this is a developing situation, but it basically, for a country like India, we have to look at a large number of elements and also see how does the global power equations play out, how do the Chinese play out, how the fact that the thing happened within 1 hour, 2 hours was the Chinese delegation meeting the Venezuelan president indicates the fact is that the Chinese were not really up to the speed as far as their intelligence is concerned. So these are some of my initial thoughts. So, and I'll keep coming in and out since I'm going to be traveling very soon.
Thanks a lot, sir, for giving your thoughts on from an Indian perspective. And if I put both your perspectives together, we have to contend with a couple of hard facts. The hard facts is USA has displayed a capability, a military capability, which is, it has got some capability which others don't have. Very crudely put. We've seen, Russia struggling in Ukraine for the past 4 years, good, bad, or ugly, right? Making only incremental gains and not getting to a political decision, and it's costed Russia quite a bit. You've seen China going around Taiwan, in circles for the past 4 years, ever since Nancy Pelosi went there, without any way forward. And I don't think China has a military option left in Taiwan. I also don't think that China has a political option in Taiwan unless things change. And if this incident, which has happened in Caracas, is any guide to go by, let's be very clear. China, Taiwan is an island too far away from China. In fact, I'll put it this way. The second thing which one has to factor in what's happened, the military angle of this, is that the Venezuelans banged on the Russian and the Chinese equipment. More than the Russian, they banged on the Chinese equipment, the radars, everything. Obviously, either all of them failed or were suppressed. And they were ineffective. At the end of the day, they were ineffective. And there's talk of the S-300 also being given to Venezuela. All of them were ineffective. Now, is this the first time? No, this is not the first time. The first time actually the Chinese equipment proved ineffective was in Pakistan.
Yes.
During Ops Indore, when we were able to, bypass all of them and do what we had to do. Right. Now you extend this to the, skirmish which is going on between Thailand and Cambodia, and in other places where Chinese equipment has come into play. Not so much the Russian equipment, the Chinese equipment. You see a general failure of Chinese equipment all over the world in combat. Now that puts the military might of China at a huge question mark. If the military might of China is taken out of the equation and their inability to, do what they wanted to do or could do with Taiwan also has gone into a huge question, then you're virtually looking at a different China today. And take into account its internal problems, which are huge. If I talk of it, we could go on for the next 3 days. They're very difficult. So, right. You see, Russia has all its elements of power intact, but yet the Ukraine war has, weakened it. And that is seen by what has happened in Novograd and the attack, the drone attack on President Putin and the nuclear command center and all that. In this kind of a scenario, whatever the outcome in Venezuela, irrespective of the political outcome and the final thing and everything, we should be clear about one issue that USA is going to impose certain things in Venezuela, and one of them is American control of oil. It doesn't matter what happens to Venezuela otherwise, and it's going to have some control over its government, whether it's with Delcy Rodriguez or someone else, Corina Machado. The political machinations will continue as an offshore power, unlike the mistake they did in Afghanistan and Iraq. So I think in this whole scenario, things are changing, and I would like to look ahead. So, John, your views ahead. Where do you think this whole thing is going? You're facing a situation where, well, you have one power in the world who's capable of virtually doing what it wants. And it has proven itself over the past 25 years to do what it wants, whatever the outcomes are, irrespective of the outcomes. So, what do we do next? How do we go ahead? How do you balance this out? That's the question, and I'd like your views on that. And you take a wild shot at it because it's a difficult question I'm posing to you.
I think Arun provided part of the answer by saying that the US has demonstrated its capacity and its technological superiority against a country that could barely defend itself. Yeah, it's picked a weak state and a weak military system after months of build-up of both economic warfare, various forms of state terrorism, and a complete breakdown of all negotiations. This is not shock and awe in the traditional US military doctrine. It's shock and awe shucks. Awe shucks is my way of saying the US has picked a patsy to attack and with a demonstration effect for everyone else. Now, the problem on the Russian side, which Foreign Minister Lavrov's statement reflects, is whether the Russian side, and we've discussed this on this program, we discussed it in Delhi, we discussed it before, and I'm not far from the only one who's raised this question. The question was raised directly by the Indian correspondents who met with President Putin before he flew to Delhi. In a conflict between India and another state, for example, Pakistan, now supported by the United States, or China, which side will Russia orient itself to? Which side will Russia take militarily, diplomatically, and so forth? What Foreign Minister Foreign Minister Lavrov is now saying, in expressing firm solidarity with the people of Venezuela confronting armed aggression, after the S-300 batteries failed, after the Buk batteries were destroyed on the ground. What's he saying? He's saying, we did not betray President Assad when the Turkish-assisted assault came at the end of 2024, and we did not betray Iran when or let down Iran when the Israeli-US attack came. Now he's saying we did not betray our commitment to the strategic partnership. He used the term again with Venezuela. As I say, it may be a little late to make these statements in the present situation, but it's because forward-looking, as you said correctly, Ravi, forward-looking, the question is whether India, Russia, and China can trust each other to deter a US operation like this one in an environment which may be less of an shock and awe shucks case. For example, if the US, emboldened, as Arun has said, thinks Greenland is next, why? Because the US wants to dictate trade across the Arctic route, as it believes it can dictate trade through the Suez Canal, through the Panama Canal. If the pardon me, US moves to Greenland next, and the Indian side has already agreed with Russia on mutual and reciprocal basing and military cooperation to protect such corridors, the corridors across the Arctic to Vladivostok, from Vladivostok to Chennai, to protect that particular maritime corridor of trade, especially energy trade for India. What can India and China now do to confirm to Trump that it's not going to be a shock and awe shucks moment in the protection of the Russia-India trade corridors, either the Arctic one or the North-South corridor? Remember, the North-South corridor through the Caucasus is threatened by Trump's proposal to establish US force enforcement of a corridor along the Armenian-Azerbaijan border. Okay, so it's not simply the case, nor is it viewed in Russia as the case, that Trump is going to be limited to a Monroe Doctrine view of Western Hemisphere. This will embolden expansion already signaled by Trump, And from a Russian point of view, I've just said, from the Indian point of view, that Putin discussed with Modi on December 4 and 5, as you know. What can India and Russia do to make strategic success of their mutual self-sufficiency and their reciprocal sovereignty? What will deter or defeat another Trump expedition? That's a major question. I don't have an answer for it, but clearly it's now even more dramatically on the agenda of Russia-India discussions, not public ones, obviously, than it was less than a month ago in Delhi.
Yeah, I think that's a fair one. What do India, China, and Russia do?
Yes.
And let me also put it up front that whatever has to be done between India and Russia or Russia and China.
Or all three together.
I don't, look, John, let me be upfront and very clear. All three won't do it. India and China will not be on the same page in this. There's too much baggage between India and China to come together with Russia on this story. For the simple reason that we have a border on which China is not relenting. And unless China relents, there's no question of altogether. And China will not relent. Because if China relents on the LAC, even by an inch, it loses, the Communist Party of China loses political relevance. The cost for China is too high to be good friends with India. The cost for China is too high because it feels that India is rising at its expense. So the thought that of Russia, India, China, no matter how seductive it looks for anyone else, will not happen. It can be India and Russia or Russia and China. So these are the facts on ground. And to think that India and China will cooperate is wishful thinking, right? And so it's, the point which you have made is, can India and Russia do anything to protect their own corridors? Chennai, Vladivostok, or for that matter, the central route and the European route. Keep the Arctic corridors open. That is the central question for us. Of course, the fact which you have said in the future, like I also have, I'm very clear that the next target after Venezuela will be Greenland. There will be pressure on Greenland to, get under the US flag. And already there's immense pressure on, Denmark to part with Greenland. Whether that succeeds or not, we'll see. But that's the next course of action. So to that extent, India is caught in a dilemma. What does it do? And that is what I'd like, Brigadier Sahgal, sir, your views on this. And I've been a little long-winded about it because I thought we need to get back to a thing where our fundamentals have to be clear as to where we are going. Uh, Brigadier Sahgal, sir, all yours.
Thank you, Ravi sir. See, the options for us are very difficult. At one level, in terms of security of the corridors, etc., the distances are too long, capacities are limited to be able to do any worthwhile job. Uh, yes, Arctic is important. Yes, we have, as part of RELOS, we have got facilities over there. But then are we going to get involved in any kind of an action in Greenland or American attempt to dominate the Arctic sea route or to deny that sea route to Russia or any Russian oriented combined? That's something which we need to be looking at. Similarly, what role can Russia play even under the RELOS, apart from deploying some submarines and some ships into the Indian Ocean region? So, while the ideas are great, but the implementability of the ideas are limited. Similarly, as for the Chinese are concerned, uh, and emboldened America could push China into a huge amount of dilemma, both in Indo-Pacific as well as, and if they find that there is no cohesion between the other three, the so-called the RIC, there is no cohesion, then that provides Americans with an opportunity to exploit. Uh, as far as India-China relationships are concerned, I go along totally with you that we have a serious boundary issue with them. But my personal take is, can we continue to allow this boundary issue to you know to allow strategic space from below us being usurped by an external player who is trying to play the role of a global cop. Now, it's not India has to give in. No, it has to be a more accommodative posture has to be uh, done by the Chinese. Otherwise, what I see happening to China is China will remain a Asia-centric player, and that also South China Sea, East Pacific, first island chain kind of a player, without any capacity or capability to project power. Slowly, what that will happen is that the West Asia, even Southeast Asia, may become slowly and steadily become an American area of influence, and the European subcontinent or European continent will then become a totally Western oriented uh, uh, dominated space. So at this point in time, the stakes are, how do you re-engineer global equations to ensure there is some kind of a rule based order and one nation which has the capacity, capability, and more importance is they are exercising their political will to ensure that the world is shaped according to their choices. They done it in Caracas. They might do it in Greenland. They might even come to Indo-Pacific. Now, the so that's, but from Indian perspective, another issue is that if India, Russia, and China are a limited supply company, then we have perforce to have a reasonable working relationship with United States. And as we discussed in the other day in NSS discussion, it will all that will happen on terms which are going to be specified by the Americans. Americans want to do the maritime. Americans want India to do XYZ. When Americans want India to develop such capabilities, so they will supply us with technologies and suppliers, but always fall short of allowing you a free hand in any of those areas. Investments will come; they'll come on their terms. You want to make a chip making, it'll come, but it'll come in their terms. The supply chain management will be done by them. In short, it's going to be business as usual with United States domination. Now, it's a choice that India has to make. The choice is limited utility with Russia, utility but limited utility, hardly any utility with China because of our boundary issue, allowing America to usurp the space which they are doing it in Western Hemisphere. They are by and large doing it in Europe, where they are being contested by the Russians, which will carry on, and in the Indo-Pacific, the Chinese are there. But this whole space is there is no projection of power by either Russia or China outside their immediate sphere of influence. That's it. So that is what the scenario is going to be. And then, of course, commodity prices, the critical minerals, the whole other critical supply chains will again become dominated by United States. So we will then have what we have seen is for last 25 years of having a dependent kind of a relationship with America. We will go back into the same equation. So this is what my take is. So it's a very introspective time for a country like India at this particular juncture.
Yeah. I go with you, sir. You said a very introspective time for a country like India. I think there is a lot for us to think, and that's what I spoke in the morning. We have to really think, and I reiterate it for the simple reason: you look at today the world in three, one third, one third, one third. One third is Americas, the second is the Middle East, and third is East Asia. I leave Europe out because Europe is a little insignificant at this point of time. Very clearly, in the Americas, Western Hemisphere, as you put it, we put it, the USA is dominating. This very action by in Venezuela, irrespective of the political outcomes, changes a lot of equations. Because, like what Brigadier Sahgal has said, America has shown the willingness to use its political, military, and commercial strength to change equations, and it has had no competition. There's no competition to it at this point of time anywhere in the Americas. So the Americas will fall in line with USA. That's the natural outcome. Maybe a few countries will continue, like Cuba, will continue to be socialist, but the rest will just get blown away. And that means the influence, the Chinese and the Russian influence there is going to reduce. It's a natural thing. You look at the Middle East, right from the Mediterranean to Pakistan. Already, America has become the sole dominant player. Iran, the way it is weakening, we don't know where Iran is going to go tomorrow. The Iranians themselves don't know the way China has let down Iran in this entire game. We have to. These are hard facts. So you see America coming up there in a big way. Look at China itself. The way it has been, the way its equipment has come out in Pakistan, or for that matter, its action in the Middle East, and for that matter now. So you see China is getting eroded. And like what Brigadier Sahgal said, I go with them completely. You'll see that China's influence has to be more limited to the East Asian sphere only, more on a defensive line, because its equipment is today in question mark, and no country can be a military force with 70% of its generals sacked in the past 1 year. You can't be a military force with so many generals sacked. If one general in India is sacked, a whole lot of questions come. Here is Xi Jinping, who sacked 70% of his generals. And armies don't function without generals, however bad they are. So, right. And in this scenario, the world needs an alternate of some kind to USA. I don't see a third force coming, a second country coming out of the blue. It has to be Russia and India, and with whatever problems they have. And I think India has to leverage this capability with Russia. Also, simultaneously deal with USA and deal with it in the change scenario. This is my proposition. In fact, this has been my proposition for the past 5 years. This is not new. Your take on this, John?
Well, I want to reinforce what Arun has said. Each of our countries, me speaking for Russia, you two speaking for India, and also China, have to engage in introspection. That's to assess the domestic force, political forces, military forces, the underlying interests that are now called in question by this particular American operation. Inside the United States, we can see a couple of things that are indicative. The money men in the United States are currently not worried at all about the future price of oil. Come February, the futures market for Brent crude or the WTI marker have hardly moved since this operation began. So inside the United States, when money is talking, they see first stability in the international oil markets. Second, the Chevron company share price is up 4% on a single day. That's obviously because Trump is promoting Chevron to take Chinese and Russian oil assets in Venezuela and turn them into oil profits for the United States. That's what the money men think in the United States. Ordinary American voters who get to exhibit their power, it's different from money power, come the midterm elections in coming November. The last measurement of US opinion was 73% opposed US military action inside Venezuela versus 25%. That's a very big gap. Now, let's see over the next few days whether the Trump bet, the Stephen Miller bet, the General Kane bet in the White House, the Pentagon, and the State Department that Americans love a winner, and this is a winner, versus the long-term, as Arun was spelling out and as you spelled out, the long-term costs of trying to run Venezuela, which is what Trump is promising, whether US voter opinion will be as approving. That's part of the introspection that's going to go on in the US in the weeks ahead, where money makes its short-term profit, but votes will count very soon. Inside Russia, I have to say that the Foreign Minister Lavrov's two statements, the first statement on the Novgorod attack, and the second statement after he spoke with Vice President Rodriguez, indicates that the faction of importance in President Putin's decision-making, the business faction, the oligarch faction, the we want business as usual faction, we want to love America faction, led in this particular Ukraine war negotiation by Kirill Dmitriev, supported by the central bank governor Elvira Nabiullina. That faction has been hit as hard, almost as hard as Maduro was hit the other night. They are suffering now from a general Russian perception, and not simply that voiced by Foreign Minister Lavrov, that there is no basis for reaching an agreement with Trump. No military security guarantee that the United States can ever agree to, because it will never stick to it. That the US is committed to regime change for ideological purposes, for commercial purposes, for strategic purposes, and so on. The blow that has been struck, you might say successfully, the shock and awe shucks blow, is interpreted in Russia in factional political terms as a major defeat for the US faction inside Kremlin. This is very important. Now, what does that leave? Exactly as you said, Arun and Ravi. Well, Russia has to make new choices in the world that exists. And the new choices are very simple. Yes, BRICS, but within BRICS, China and India. And who was first to express deep concern at the attack on Putin? It was Prime Minister Modi. The Chinese did not express anything comparable. Instead, President Xi delegated to a low-level spokesman for the foreign ministry to express boilerplate disagreement with escalation on the battlefield. There's a huge difference in sentiment, and that's going to potentially change the dynamic between Russia and India, Russia and China. On the other hand, from Russian point of view, and President Putin has tried his level best to say, can India and China reach an accommodation on the Himalayan border, because there are greater stakes threatening all three countries now? That's been a Putin question. And you are in a better position. Arun sort of says one thing, and Ravi, you say another thing. I'm the outsider here. I leave you with the question. But as we do the introspection in Russia, we do the introspection in India, we're not able to do the introspection in Beijing. These are the points at which we confront the S plus S equals SS. If we don't develop together self-sufficiency and support each other, if we don't develop mutual and reciprocal sovereignty, then we will fail at strategic success. Since we all three agree on SS, it's over to us.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that concept. That we need to be self-sufficient. We need to maintain our sovereignty, protect our sovereignty. Unfortunately or fortunately, the BRICS concept, which BRICS as a concept to do this, I don't see it happening. Let me be very frank. For the simple reason, China and India will not agree with each other on any aspect of strategic thing. It's nice for Brigadier Arun Sahgal to say this. I've heard him say this earlier also. That's a point of view. There are many people who say, okay, we need to look at it. But the politics drive everything in China. Politics drives most things in India. The politics of this border problem is beyond the strategy. The strategic thinking gets defeated on the politics. We have to think of the way we're going to handle this entire situation differently. And also, Russia also has to introspect on, can it depend on China? For the simple reason that what you said just now, when the attack on President Putin happened, China was not there. And if you've seen, China has been missing in action at every critical point of its own friends. So I don't know whether India will ever have the confidence to trust China in any manner. So that is where we are. We are, all of us, and I'm looking at the India-Russia thing more seriously. We are in a difficult situation. We are in a new situation. We have to sit together and think as to how to go through this. Whether India and Russia together have to start dealing with USA in a different framework. You have to deal with the devil at one point of time. You can't ignore it. So, and that's how I look at it. Yeah, I'd like your views on it, and then we'll conclude. Please go ahead.
I'm very close to ending, but a small fact on the ground. We know that the senior Chinese official for Latin America, Qi Caozi, and a large delegation were in Caracas to meet with President Maduro on Friday. We know that, and that was a significantly higher level of demonstrable support from China than the Russian side demonstrated. But leave that aside. The important thing is when we look at the account of the timing of the US attack, and you look at the time tags that General Kane provided, we are told by him that the US side was ready for its operation 4 days earlier, and that, according to General Kane, in front of President Trump, the reason for the delay was the cloud cover, the weather. And coincidentally, just as Minister Qi Cao-tse was taking off to fly home from China, breaking through the cloud cover over Caracas, the US decided it could break through the cloud cover and attack. Now, what does that tell me? It tells me the following small point. The US did not want to kill anybody Chinese when they attacked Caracas. They did kill Chinese, and they did hit a Chinese establishment, if you remember. President Clinton did during the war against Belgrade in May 1999. The Americans claimed it was a mistake. There's a lot of doubt that it was a mistake. So compared to Clinton and the war against Yugoslavia, Belgrade, Serbia in 1999, the Americans were deterred by the Chinese presence in Caracas to delay their attack. That doesn't mean they weren't going to attack. It does mean there's deterrent quality, deterrent capability of the Chinese side, of the Russian side. A similar tiny incident. The US Coast Guard and other forces have been chasing a tanker called the Bella One. They attempted to board it off the Venezuelan coast. The Bella One decided to run for it and refused to allow boarding. On its way into the Atlantic, it changed its flag to the Russian flag. And the Russian side warned the US side not to touch a Russian property. And the Americans were deterred. They stopped. Now, I can't tell you that the Chinese presence in Caracas deterred Trump from attacking. It delayed it. I can't say that the Russian reflagging of the Bella One and renaming of it, re-registering it, defeated the US attempt to impose a blockade, but it did deter an attack on that tanker. Now, we also know from Operation Sindoor that the Indian side's operations deterred the Americans who deterred the Pakistanis. Am I right about how that war came to a ceasefire?
Yes.
Can we and our audience assemble so that we can leave our audience in a slightly more hopeful position that there is the capability, if exercised individually and severally, there is the capability of Russia, China, and India, each of which must make their own form of peace with the United States. The US empire isn't collapsing anytime soon. The US is not going to go into civil war. The Trump administration may or may not preserve its congressional power in a few months' time. However, each of us must make separate pieces with the on US trade and other things. But none of us and all of us agree that this operation demonstrates there's nothing the US side can be understood to commit to, if not violence against Russian, Indian, and Chinese interests. So it seems to me that we can reciprocally, collectively, mutually come up with schemes to deter them. Why? Because Trump doesn't like to lose. As Arun began our program, he goes for the weak state, the patsy state, the undefended targets.
Yeah, I think what you said is absolutely right. Uh, USA goes for the weak links. And in that context, neither India nor Russia or China are weak links in the traditional sense that USA will start attacking any of them. That's out of the equation. The issue is they'll touch the weak links and the weak parts of this whole story. And that's something which we will have to look into in the future. But before I end, what I'd like to say is I'd like to thank Dr. John Helmer and Brig Arun Sahgal, who's right now not on the podcast, to have fleshed out a lot of intangibles or dark corners of this whole story, if I may say. Because what is ahead is a world, or what is being portrayed is a world where USA is going to get back to unipolarity. What I'd like to say, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen just because USA has gone into Venezuela or tomorrow it will make an attempt into Greenland. It's not possible that America will start ruling, the high seas on its own. It doesn't have that capability simply. So I think it is time for nations which, like what John said in the beginning, self-sufficiency plus sovereignty. You build towards self-sufficiency and build towards mutual sovereignty to get to the strategic success. And we have to be clear what is strategic success also going to be in our own ways, whether you're in Russia, India, or China. And we'll have to see. And also, there is no gainsaying the fact, I'll end, that the accommodation between China and India is not going to be easy. I don't think it will come in my lifetime. Let me be very clear about it. So we in India have to look at Russia in a big manner. And I see that Russia also has to look in India in a big manner so that we can balance out, whatever USA is up to. And we don't know, I leave with the thought to all of you, we don't know tomorrow if China and USA get together and start a G2 concept, which has been in the air, however improbable it might be. So we don't know how things are going. We have entered a nebulous world, and we'll see how things chart out and how post-Venezuela global events pan out. So with this, I'd like to thank Dr. John Helmer for his thoughts, and I'd like to thank all of you who are going to see this. Please do join in on our next podcast, which we will have probably in a week's time. Thank you, and good evening to all of you. And of course, that's good evening from India or a good day from wherever you are watching this in the world. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Ravi.